Hello and welcome to The Essential Reads. My name is Isaac and my goal is to bring to you a bunch of classic audiobooks in an easy and accessible way. We are continuing with Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, and this is Part 4, Chapter 6. Let's begin. Later on, whenever he remembered that moment, it presented itself to Raskolnikov in the following manner. The commotion that had made itself heard on the other side of the door suddenly grew louder, and the door opened a little way. "What on earth?" Porfiry Petrovitch exclaimed in annoyance. "Why, I gave specific instructions." For an instant, no one replied, but it could be seen that there were several people on the other side of the door, apparently trying to push someone away. "What on earth is going on out there?" Porfiry Petrovitch said again in alarm. "They've brought the prisoner, Nikolai," someone's voice said. "I don't need him just now. Take him away and tell him to wait." "Damn it, what a shambles!" Porfiry shouted as he rushed to the door. "But sir, he's..." The same voice began again, and was suddenly cut short. For roughly 2 seconds, no more, there was a genuine struggle. Then suddenly someone gave someone else a violent shove, and a very pale man walked straight into Porfiry Petrovitch's chambers. The outward appearance of this man was at first sight very strange. He was staring straight in front of him, but apparently without seeing anyone. There was a glitter of determination in his eyes, but at the same time his features were covered in a deathly pallor, as though he were being led to the scaffold. His lips, which had turned utterly white, were twitching slightly. He was still very young, dressed like a plebeian, of average height, lean and thin, his hair cropped in a short circle, with delicate, rather dry-looking features. The man who had been so unexpectedly pushed aside by him was the first to rush into the room after him, and managed to grab him by the shoulder. This was one of the guards. But Nikolai jerked his arm free and got away from him a second time. A group of inquisitive onlookers began to gather in the doorway. Some of them tried to come inside. The whole of what has just been described took place in little more than a single instant. "Go away! You're too early! Wait until you're called! Why has he been brought so soon?" Porfiry Petrovitch muttered in annoyance, as though all his calculations had been upset. But Nikolai suddenly got down on his knees. "What are you doing?" Porfiry Petrovitch shouted in amazement. "I'm the guilty one. The sin is mine. I'm the murderer." Nikolai finally got out, as though he were a little short of breath, but in rather a loud voice. For about 10 seconds there was a silence, as though they had all been stunned. Even the guard staggered back, and instead of going up to Nikolai, beat an automatic retreat to the doorway and stood there, motionless. "What on earth?" Porfiry Petrovitch exclaimed when he had recovered from his momentary state of numb shock. "I'm the murderer," Nikolai repeated after a slight pause. "What? You? Whom have you murdered?" Porfiry Petrovitch looked as though he were at his wits' end. Nikolai paused again slightly. "Ilyona Ivanovna and her sister, Lizaveta Ivanovna. I murdered them. For the next, I had a black turn," he added suddenly, and again fell silent. He was still on his knees. Porfiry Petrovitch stood motionless for a few seconds, as though he were reflecting, and then suddenly flew into motion again, waving his arms at the uninvited witnesses. In a trice, they disappeared from the room, and the door closed. He then took a glance at Raskolnikov, who was standing in the corner, staring wildly at Nikolai, and began to move in his direction. But then stopped suddenly, looked at him, swiftly transferred his gaze to Nikolai, and then back to Raskolnikov, then over to Nikolai again, and then abruptly, as though with great interest, pounced on Nikolai. "What do you mean, trying to run ahead of me with your black turns?" He shouted at him with something approaching malice. "I haven't asked you yet if you had a black turn. What I want to know is, have you committed a murder?" "I'm the one who did it. I'll make a statement," Nikolai said. "Oh, for God's sake! What did you do it with?" "An axe. I had one handy." "I say, the men's in a hurry. Just you alone?" Nikolai did not understand the question. Was it just you who did it?
Yes, Mitka's innocent. He had no part of any of it.
Now take your time with Mitka, will you? Oh my god! But then why did you run down the stairs that time? I mean, the yard keepers ran into you both.
I did it to throw them off. Running away with Mitka that time.
Nikolai answered, hurrying his words as though he had prepared them in advance. Yes, I was right, Porfiry exclaimed malevolently. He's simply repeating something he was told to say, he muttered, as if to himself, and again suddenly looked at Raskolnikov. So taken up with Nikolai had he apparently been, that for 1 second he had actually forgotten about Raskolnikov. Now he suddenly gathered his thoughts again, and looked positively embarrassed. Rodion Romanovich, my dear fellow, I'm terribly sorry, sir, he said, rushing over to him. This simply won't do, sir. Please, there's nothing for you to do here. I'm afraid You see what surprises there are. Be so good, sir. And, taking him by the arm, he showed him to the door.
It looks as though you weren't expecting this,
Raskolnikov said. As might have been expected, although he had not really taken everything in as yet, he had already cheered up considerably. You weren't expecting it either, dear fellow. Look at your hand. It's trembling.
You're trembling too, Porfiry Petrovich.
So I am. Most unexpected. By now they were standing in the doorway. Porfiry was waiting in impatience for Raskolnikov to go out of it.
So, you're not going to show me your little surprise then?
Raskolnikov said suddenly. Listen to him talk, yet his teeth are chattering together in his head. You are an ironical fellow, aren't you? Well, sir. Au revoir.
If you want my opinion, it's goodbye.
As God sees fit, sir. As God sees fit, Porfiry muttered with a sort of twisted smile. As he passed through the office, Raskolnikov noticed that many of the people there gave him fixed stares. Among the crowd in the entrance hall, he saw 2 of the yard keepers from that building, the ones he had tried to talk into going down to the police station with him that night. They were standing there, waiting for something. But no sooner was he on the staircase than he suddenly heard the voice of Porfiry Petrovich behind him once again. Turning round, he saw that Porfiry was trying to catch up with him, thoroughly out of breath. There's just one other thing, Rodion Romanovich, sir. As far as all that other stuff's concerned, as God sees fit. But even so, I shall have to ask you a few formal questions. So we'll be seeing each other again. Yes, we shall, sir. And Porfiry came to a standstill in front of him, smiling. Yes, we shall, sir, he added once more. He looked as though there was something else he wanted to say, but was somehow unable to get it out.
You really must forgive my behavior just now. I was a little hasty.
Raskolnikov began, his spirits now completely restored to a point where he could not resist a bit of swagger. It's quite all right, sir. It's quite all right, Porfiry chipped in almost joyfully. I was hasty too. I do have a poisonous tongue, I confess. I confess. So we'll be seeing each other, sir. If God sees fit, we'll be seeing a great, great deal of each other, sir.
And shall we really get to know each other at last?
Raskolnikov asked. We shall. We shall, Porfiry Petrovich said affirmatively, and screwing up his eyes, gave him a very serious look. Off to that name day celebration, are you, sir?
A funeral, actually.
Ah, yes, it's a funeral. Well, do look after your health, sir. Do look after your health.
I must say I don't really know what I can wish you in return, Raskolnikov said, already beginning to resume his descent down the staircase, but then turning around again to face Porfiry. I'd like to wish you every success. But, I mean, you yourself are aware of what a comical job yours is.
Why is it comical, sir? Porfiry Petrovich said, instantly pricking up his ears, and also on the point of turning to go.
Well, I mean, look at the psychological torture you've been meting out to that poor Mikola. In that way of yours, you have... to the point where he confessed. You must have been hammering on him day and night, telling him, You're the murderer! You're the murderer! Well, and yet now he's confessed. You're picking him to little pieces again. Telling him that he's lying, that he's not the murderer, that he couldn't possibly be the murderer, and that he's just repeating something he was told to say. Well, what sort of a job is that if it's not a comical one? So you noticed when I told Nikolai just now that he was repeating something someone had told him to say. How could I fail to? That was sharp-witted. Sharp-witted of you, sir. You notice everything. You have a genuinely playful intellect, sir. And you fastened right on to the most comical note. Is it the writer Gogol whom they say possessed that ability to the very highest degree? Yes, sir, that's right, Gogol. Yes, sir, Gogol, sir. I look forward to our next meeting with the greatest pleasure, sir. I, too. Raskolnikov headed straight for home. So tired and confused was he that when he got back to his room, he threw himself on the sofa and sat there for a quarter of an hour, merely resting and trying to do what he could to gather his thoughts. He did not even try to think about Nikolai. He felt he had been defeated. That in Nikolai's confession there had been something inexplicable, astonishing. Something he could not fathom now for all the world. But Nikolai's confession was an established fact, and the consequences of that fact at once became clear to him. His lie could not but be found out, and when it was, he would be taken in hand again. Until then, at least, he was free. Now he must do all he could in order to protect himself, for the danger was unavoidable. The question was, how unavoidable? The situation was beginning to become clear. As he recalled in rough outline the overall implications of the scene that had taken place between Porfiry and himself, he could not help but shudder with horror again. Of course, he did not yet know all of Porfiry's motives, had been unable to make out what it was he had been bargaining on just now. But a part of the game he was playing had been revealed, and of course, no one was more aware than he was of the risk to himself that this move in Porfiry's game involved. A little longer, and he might have given himself away completely, in such a manner that it could be regarded as evidence against him. Aware of his morbid temperament, having correctly sized him up and seen into him right from the very first glance, Porfiry had acted, if somewhat too vigorously, then nonetheless with almost unerring sureness. There was no question that Raskolnikov had succeeded in compromising himself to the hilt just now. But so far, he had not given Porfiry any evidence. As yet, there was nothing positive. But did he have a proper grasp of the situation now? Was he not mistaken? What result had Porfiry been trying to achieve today? Had he really had something up his sleeve? What had it been? Had he really been waiting for something or not? What would their passing have been like today had it not been for the unexpected catastrophe brought about by Nikolai? Porfiry had come very close to showing his entire hand. Of course, he had taken a risk in doing so, but he had done it. And if he had really had something more up his sleeve, he would, so it seems to Raskolnikov, have shown that too. What had the surprise been? Was it a joke of some kind? Had it meant anything or not? Could there have been some piece of evidence concealed beneath it? Something akin to a positive accusation? What about the man who had come to see him yesterday? Where had he vanished to? Where was he today? He was certain that if Porfiry really had anything on him, it had something to do with that man yesterday. He was sitting on the sofa, his head slumped on his chest, leaning his elbows on his knees and covering his face with his hands. The nervous tremor still continued in every limb of his body. At last he got up, took his cap, thought for a moment, and then walked towards the door. He felt somehow that, at least for the rest of today, he could almost certainly consider himself out of danger. Suddenly his heart felt a sensation approaching joy. He wanted to go to Katerina Ivanovna's as soon as possible, He was too late for the funeral, of course, but he would still be in time for the zakuski, and there, in a moment or two, he would see Sonia. He stopped, reflected, and a painful smile forced itself to his lips. Today, he said to himself. Yes, this very day. That's how it must be. At the instant he began to open the door, it suddenly began to open of its own accord. He shivered and leapt back. The door was opening slowly and quietly, and suddenly a figure appeared. That of yesterday's man from under the ground. The man paused in the doorway, looked at Raskolnikov without saying anything, and took a step into the room. He was exactly as he had been yesterday, the same figure, dressed in the same way. But in his gaze and features there was a marked alteration. Now he looked somewhat down in the mud. And after a moment or two, he exhaled a deep sigh. All that remained was for him to put his palm to his cheek and twist his head to one side, and he would have looked just like a woman. What do you want? Raskolnikov asked, stiff with fright. The man said nothing. Then suddenly he bowed deeply to him, almost down to the floor. At any rate, he touched the floor with one finger of his right hand. What are you up to? Raskolnikov shouted. I'm guilty, the man articulated quietly. Of what? Evil thoughts. They both looked at each other. I got annoyed when you arrived that time. Maybe you were drunk or something, and tried to make the yardkeepers go down to the police station with you and ask questions about the blood. I got annoyed about them leaving you alone and thinking you were just drunk. I got so annoyed that I couldn't sleep. And since we remembered your address, we came here yesterday and asked for you. Who did? Raskolnikov interrupted, beginning to remember for an instant. I mean, I insulted you. So you live in that building? In the same. Why, I was standing with them in the gateway, or have you forgotten? We've had our workshop there from time immemorial. We're furriers, artisans. We do our work at home. But what made me most annoyed of all was... And suddenly Raskolnikov had a clear memory of the entire scene that had taken place in the gateway 2 days earlier. He remembered that there had been, in addition to the art keepers, a few other men standing there. There had been women, too. He recalled one voice suggesting they take him straight to the police station. He could not remember what the man who had spoken had looked like, but he did have a memory of having said something to him in reply, of turning round towards him. So this was what lay behind all yesterday's horrible events. Most horrible of all was the thought that he really had almost come to grief, had very nearly cooked his own goose because of a trivial occurrence like that. It meant that, apart from the story of his visit to the apartment as a prospective lodger, and of his asking about the blood, this man knew nothing worth telling. It meant that Porfiry, too, knew about nothing. Nothing, apart from his delirium, had no evidence than all this psychology, which was all conjecture, had nothing positive to go on. It meant that, unless more evidence turned up, and it must not turn up, must not, there was nothing more they could do to him, was there? How could they convict him even if they were to arrest him? It also meant that Porfiry had only now found out about the apartment, had not known about it earlier. Was it you who told Porfiry today that I went there? He exclaimed, struck by a sudden idea. Which Porfiry would that be? The state investigator? Yes, I told him. The yard keepers didn't go down to the station at that time, but I did. Today? I got there a minute before you, and I heard it all. The whole thing. The way he tortured you. Where? How on earth? When? I was sitting in there all the time, right behind that partition of his. What? So you were the surprise, were you? But how could this possibly happen? For pity's sake! When I saw, the artisan began, that the yard keepers weren't wanting to go down there just because I told them to, saying that it was too late, and that in any case he'd probably fly off the handle at them for not having come immediately, I got annoyed. I couldn't sleep, and I started finding a few things out. Well, I finished doing that yesterday, and today I went along there. The first time I went, he wasn't there. I went back about an hour later, but they wouldn't let me in to see him. The third time I went, I was allowed in. I began to give him all the information, just the way it happened, and he started leaping about the room and beating his chest. "What are you doing to me, you bandits?" he said. "If I'd known all this, I'd have had him brought here under armed escort." Then he ran out, told someone to come and see him, and stood talking to him in a corner. And then he came back to me again and started asking me questions and shouting at me. Read me a regular sermon, he did. I gave him all the information I had, and told him you hadn't dared to make any reply to the things I said to you yesterday, and that you hadn't recognized me. And he began running about again, beating his breast, flying off the handle and racing to and fro. And when they came in to tell him you were there, "All right," he said. "You go behind that partition, sit there, and don't move, whatever you may hear." And he brought me a chair himself and locked me in. "I may question you too," he said. "But when Nikolai was brought in, as soon as you'd gone, he let me out and told me to go." "I'll require your presence again," he said, "and I want to ask you some more questions." "Where were you when he questioned Nikolai?" "After he'd let you go, he let me go as well. And then he started questioning Nikolai." The artisan paused, and suddenly bowed again, touching the floor with one finger. "Forgive me my slander and my hatred." "God will forgive you," Raskolnikov answered. And as soon as he said this, the artisan bowed to him, not to the floor this time, however, but only to the waist, turned slowly away, and went out of the room. "It's still all conjecture," Raskolnikov kept saying to himself, and left the room in better spirits than ever. "Now let's resume the struggle," he said with a vicious, sarcastic smile as he went down the stairs. The viciousness was aimed at himself. He remembered his faint-heartedness with shame and contempt. Thank you so very much for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, follow, share, all that jazz. And if you really enjoyed, do subscribe because there is more to come. If you're listening on podcast, please leave a review as it helps get this in front of as many people as possible. And reading your reviews really, really makes my day. If you want to support the show further, you can click on the Ko-Fi link, which is now on screen. It's a direct way to donate to the show and help improve this space and, help me live. Or you can just listen to the show on Spotify in your sleep, or while you're awake, to help me reach the monetization requirements that I need also on that platform as well. It would be fantastic. If you're on podcast, maybe listen on Spotify and help me get all the things I need there. That would be great. But once again, thank you very, very much for listening. This is the end of part 4. We'll start in a couple of days with part 5. And until then, bye-bye.